Oh.
All right. The broadcast started, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Giselle.
So we do want to let you all know before we begin that this is an iLead program. We are trying to get iLead onto the screen so that they can let you all know more about the program before we get started. So just give us a minute before we actually get started.
Hi, hello, James and Giselle.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for letting us in. I know it's been, having issues through Zoom has been a common theme for all of us, so no worries on that. Natalie, are you able to speak currently?
I think she's raising her hand, so let me promote her to. Oh, okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Sorry, you have... Okay. Hi. Okay, hi. I am not able to screen share, I think, because I was hoping to be connected through the CNL account, but I can talk a little, give you guys an intro before we start. So yeah, before we begin, hi, welcome everyone to the Xenophobia within POC communities. Today we'll be having a presentation by Giselle Vincent and James King, who are social justice educators from the Cross Cultural Center. Just a reminder for all the iLead requirements that we have this quarter. So all our iLead will be transferring onto digital and virtual Zoom meetings. And remember that there's 2 ways to receive iLead completion. So that's either through 6 stamps or 10 stamps. And 6 stamps will earn you a certificate of completion, while the 10 stamps will earn you the validation on your co-curricular record in addition to the certificate of completion. Remember that you have to register for each workshop beforehand, and you can find all the links to register on our website, and you can look up getinvolved.ucsd.edu/ccl/leadership, or if you just look up UCSD CCL iLead program, you'll be able to find the link there and you can register. Remember, for full credit, you have to attend the workshop in its entirety, and we'll be releasing the Google form so that you can mark your attendance towards the end of the workshop, just to ensure that you get your credit for the stamp. So that's the way that you'll be receiving your virtual stamp, through that Google form. And if you have any more further questions, you can email us at ccl@ucsd.edu. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. With that, we'll be starting the presentation soon. We wanted to have a few disclaimers. One being that the webinar will be recorded, but no one's faces will be showing. The only faces that will be in the recording are me and Giselle's, so no one needs to worry about that. But we'll be recording this, and it will be uploaded to the Cross's YouTube page. Next, we'll be using Google Slides closed captioning. So there might be, actually, sorry, let me turn that on now. All right, so we'll be using the closed captioning. for Google Slides. If there's any words that are wrong, please excuse that. And lastly, we'll be using the Slack app afterwards, and we should have time after to explain how to get onto it. So once the webinar is done, if you have any questions or want to discuss anything further that we talked about in this, you can go over to the Slack app and we'll be on there for roughly half an hour to an hour to answer any questions. So this is the beginning of our presentation called Xenophobia within Communities of Color.
So hello, welcome. Before we begin, we do want to give a land acknowledgement. Even though we are not currently present at UCSD, we are still a form of UCSD, and UC San Diego does sit on unsettled territory and traditional homelands of the Kumeyaay people. We as members of the UC San Diego community must acknowledge the legacy of the Kumeyaay people. So please join me in a moment of silence to honor the original people of this land. Okay, thank you. So my name is Giselle Vincent. I'm a social justice educator intern at UCSD's Cross Cultural Center, and my gender pronouns are she, her, and hers.
And hi, my name is James King. I am also a social justice educator intern at the Cross Cultural Center, and my pronouns are he, him, his. So this is a table of context just to go over different things that we'll be discussing for today. First and foremost, we're going to go over some community guidelines and explain how that we'll kind of be doing a little differently since this is over Zoom. Next, we'll be talking about what is xenophobia. Next, juxtaposing xenophobia to COVID-19, along with xenophobia in communities of color, and also how to call in our friends and family when they're exhibiting xenophobic behavior or saying xenophobic comments. So first, going over community guidelines, we recognize because this is a Zoom webinar, it might be kind of weird to have community guidelines. We want to present these as different ways of engagement amongst whatever circles or groups that you're in at this moment. But there's also will be a few that we would like to highlight within this presentation, along with what we'll be talking about in the Slack app if people join. So first, being a brave space. There'll be different moments when we'll ask if you have any questions about anything or if you have responses to the questions we ask. Please understand that this is a very open space, it's a learning space, so please be comfortable to answer or ask questions if you feel the need. One mic, one star, not very relevant in this case. Inclusive language, so as we said before, we already stated both of our pronouns, so please be mindful of those. Next, lean into your discomfort. So the things that we may be discussing might be uncomfortable for you. We ask that you still lean into that because it can still possibly be a learning space for you. Next is the Vegas rule. So what it said here stays here, what is learned here leaves here, particularly since we'll be discussing. If one of us happens to share a close or personal story, please don't spread that out to people, but please learn from that lesson or that example we give. Make space, take space. Also not very, very relevant in this case, but it basically means that if you find yourself interacting with discussions a lot, whether it's in Slack or answering questions in this case, please allow other people the same opportunity, and also challenge the idea, not the person. So the different things we'll be discussing today, it's all information. So if you ever have a question about the information or you want to challenge the idea, that's very fine, but please don't challenge or attack us because this is meant to be informative for everyone.
So going into the presentation, what is xenophobia? So xenophobia as a noun is a fear or hatred of foreigners, people from different cultures, or strangers. And as an adjective is relating to or exhibiting fear or hatred of foreigners, people from different cultures, or strangers. So meaning exhibiting this hate towards people who might be different from you or people who might not be from the same country as you. So why is it important to identify and to know what xenophobia or what xenophobic behavior is? One reason being that it is also, it can be harmful to others, and that can cause a lot of different types of oppression. So one of those, so something that results from xenophobia is structural oppression. So examining the impacts that xenophobia has on different policies. So xenophobia is known to maintain uneven power relations. This can mean in terms of like education, where in some places folks who aren't from that country and do not qualify for education are perpetuating harmful stereotypes across different media platforms. As now social media is such a big thing, you see a lot of people exhibiting their own type of xenophobic behavior that they may have learned from other family members or just stuff that they have come across, and they promote that all over their social media. It also prompts occurrence of hate crimes, causes discriminatory policies like immigration or travel bans, and it also compromises access to employment, housing, and education, healthcare.
So these are different forms of xenophobic policies in the US. So one being the Chinese Exclusion Act. Just to go over it very briefly, in 1849, over 200,000 Chinese immigrants had come to the US after the gold rush in search of jobs and also in search of financial stability. But in 1882, the Congress had passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which essentially halted all immigration from China. This was very prominent because it's essentially done because of this fear of Chinese workers coming and taking jobs from Americans. And something that a lot of people don't actually realize is that because of this Exclusion Act, a lot of Chinese immigrants were actually, they were very limited in the jobs they were able to create or the businesses they were able to create, which is why today we have different stereotypical ideas of what Chinese businesses are like. Next is the Japanese internment. So a few months after Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt had signed the Executive Order 9066, which essentially allowed the federal government to take over 100,000 Japanese Americans from their homes and place them into internment camps, all under the belief that anyone who was of Japanese descent was a threat to the nation because of what was happening during World War II. So both of these are examples of policies in the US being created solely out of fear of either people being other from what is known in our country or being of a different culture or a different nationality, even if they are actually American. An example of Japanese internment. Okay, so we're going to ask you all, what are different examples of xenophobia you have seen? So different examples could be the way certain people view, say, Africa as a nation. And I say nation in particular because very many people will call it a nation or a country and not recognize it as a continent. Or how different people view issues of the border. So this is your opportunity to place any answers you have or you would like to share into the chat. And a few people who are on the panel with us will go through them and share the answers, or if you have any questions at all. So I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes, and then we'll continue.
So some people are saying the travel ban against people from Syria, Iraq, and Iran, hate crimes against Asian people in response to COVID-19, which we will get into in a second. And then people avoiding Chinese/Asian supermarkets during the lockdown, the Muslim ban, students on campus assuming East Asian students wearing face masks have COVID-19. Someone else said an example of xenophobia that I've seen currently is the way that coronavirus pandemic increased hate crimes towards Asian people. And there is a question. I don't know, James, if you want to try to answer this one. It is, what is the difference between xenophobia and racism?
I think the difference there would be, okay, well, first of all, that's a really good question. The biggest difference, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to answer this concisely. One difference I see is the way that both originated. So it depends on how we're talking about racism in general, but the first form of racism within the American context was through child slavery and all that, and how slavery, it was the first time that slavery had ever been connected to this concept of race, or that the concept of race was even made relevant. So in that sense, it's truly about viewing someone based on their race and then discriminating against them, while xenophobia is the fear of other people depending on certain things. So literally anything that is other, and very often that can coincide with race, and very often it does. But there's a technical difference between them, but very often they're one and the same in a lot of situations. I hope that answers your question. I can answer it more in depth later on. The timer has gone by. Was there any more comments?
Yeah, so two more. One person said police brutality against African Americans, and then another person said, I think that the narratives in the U.S. about the U.S.-Mexico border are steeped in xenophobia because it erases the history of making that border and the history of exploiting undocumented immigrant workers for their convenience of the U.S. So these are all really great examples, and thank you all for sharing.
Thank you. No, really, thank you a lot. This is a lot of really good participation.
Yeah. So now we're going to go on to xenophobia and COVID-19. So how COVID-19 has heightened xenophobia towards Asian Americans and the effect that it has on the Asian American community. So a lot of you have already touched on this, but we do want to just give a little reminder that COVID-19 does affect everyone, not just a specific race or people. The CDC actually had to put this disclaimer that the disease can make anyone sick regardless of race or ethnicity. So some things that have happened towards Asian Americans because of COVID is physical abuse towards Asian Americans. I've seen a lot on social media, people will be recording others physically harming Asian Americans just because they're riding a bus, or a lot of Asian American businesses have lost customers and they're actually losing a lot of business during this time because people are afraid that this virus is linked to their food. And also just folks like walking away from Asian American folks because they're afraid that they're going to get the virus, or blaming Asian Americans for the spread of the virus when it really has, they could have never even been to where the virus had started or anything like that. Just solely blaming these folks because of the way they look and how who they are. So here are some more examples from Twitter that we found. So Donald Trump calling it the Chinese virus. Here you see an Asian American woman eating some soup, and someone said, why can't y'all just eat spaghetti or some? And then again, an Asian American woman eating fruit, and someone said, little late to be eating regular food, isn't it? So this also comes with the fact that like Asian cuisine and significance differ from Western ideas of food. So what is normal to us can be abnormal to someone else, and we are basing these judgments off of our own opinions rather than something that we might not know to be factual to them.
And also we have a video here.
Experiences of racism has intensified with the coronavirus. The racist assumption that if you look Chinese, if you look Asian, you might be a virus carrier.
Because this is a virus that's coming out of a city in China, because it's a virus that from a foreign land, they automatically group all Chinese people as this monolith that we all are to blame, that we all need to be avoided, that we all need to be quarantined. So my mom is a nurse at a Toronto hospital. One day a patient had come up to her and asked for a mask. And my mom, being a nurse, she has to ask the patient, oh, why do you need a mask? Are you coughing? Are you sneezing? What seems to be the problem? And the patient replied to her, no, none of those things. There's just so many Chinese people here. I need a mask.
So we're in Scarborough. Scarborough is actually one of the most diverse areas in Toronto. A lot of immigrant communities. In this specific riding, this mall is one of the big hubs in this specific area. Usually the food court is a congregation spot. But as we can see from the number of empty seats there are, it seems like there is some impact. Right? The first day the virus broke, there's barely anyone around. Normally you might see the whole room is packed, right? As we can see, it's kind of like maybe a little more than half, right? We are seeing a bit of a rebound, which is great. So this is Pacific Mall, one of the biggest Chinese malls outside of Asia. Pacific Mall relies also on a lot of non-Chinese customers. Perhaps consumers from other communities are sort of seeing Pacific Mall as, dangerous. Hopefully, as people become less concerned about coronavirus, more and more people will start coming back to the mall.
Major information at the top of their search results.
The reactions I've seen to the coronavirus in 2020 are very similar to the reactions that I saw as a child with SARS in 2003.
During the SARS outbreak, my family owned a small business in London, Ontario. What we saw was a complete decline in that business. And you have to remember that immigrants tend to work in food, they tend to work in service because they couldn't get any other jobs. When you have something like that happen, you choke off their only line of income. In order to not marginalize Chinese Canadians, it's really simple. Don't be a jerk. And when you see something happening, shut it down. Be a good ally.
Racism isn't going to protect you from the virus. Xenophobia isn't going to protect you from the virus. What will protect you from the virus is taking the precautions that experts tell you to take.
Okay, so something we understand about the video is that even though they're talking about the Canadian population, in reality, this isn't something that's just fixed within America, especially because of how widespread COVID-19 is at this point, which is why the video itself is still very relevant. So what was your reaction to the last few slides, and can you think of any examples of xenophobia that you have seen based on COVID-19? So some of you had already mentioned a few already. I think I'll put 3 minutes on the clock this time because of the amount of participation before, and then we'll continue.
And also, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A section. So make sure to drop your questions there like that they don't get mixed in with all the other comments that are coming in through the chat. So someone said, you see social accounts saying xenophobia is a normal reaction to COVID. A lot of tweets and comments on Instagram posts. The barring of people with Asian features from praying in religious buildings. Someone said that they believe xenophobia is present all year at UCSD, not just during this pandemic. And someone else said, I think it's pretty upsetting that people are using the virus as an excuse to be racist. Studies have even shown that the main spread of the virus in the US was from European travelers, but people keep pointing the finger to the Asian community. Someone agreed with this. It is a reasonable reaction. I am Asian American and I am saying this. Someone else said some people believe that banning travels from China will stop the spread of COVID, which is clearly not the case. Someone else said using TikTok to deliver the wrong message about the virus. And then someone else said the discussion of how COVID originated from bats and people making up the fact that the guy ate bat soup, even though it's not true. So I think a lot of you are bringing up really good points, and also bringing up the point that a lot of the xenophobic behavior that we are seeing is actually stemming from incorrect information and the misinformation that does get spread throughout the media. Someone said, it is interesting to see how history repeats itself, but I definitely think how more intense and the larger scale it is this time compared to reactions in 2003. It's pretty scary that someone even poured acid on an Asian woman purely because she was Asian and because of the current disillusions, for example.
All right, that is time thus far. Again, y'all have really amazing comments, and I really appreciate this level of participation. Everything else said is very spot on and right. I'm not even sure what else to say about the different comments. It's all very troubling and upsetting, and it's kind of, I think in a lot of ways, it's kind of showing us different issues in our society that people kind of try to avoid. So next we'll be talking about xenophobia in communities of color, so how communities of color are impacted by xenophobia or how they themselves are exhibiting different forms of xenophobia. So now what do you know about xenophobia, particularly within communities of color? We'll spend a few minutes on this if anyone has any comments. If not, it's fine, we can move on. We just want to make sure everyone had the chance to discuss and participate as much as they wanted to, or if there's any questions that anyone has.
So someone asked, how can you support Chinese businesses during this time while maintaining social distancing? So a lot of delivery apps do have, like Grubhub, Postmates, you can still order off of those apps and still be able to support these businesses. Asian markets as well should still be open, of course, with the proper care and following all guidelines that we have been given. You can still support these businesses. There are also multiple ways. A lot of restaurants still do takeout, so you can call and then they have their own way of giving you your food so that you can pay and everything within the guidelines. So there are multiple ways. I know Postmates and Grubhub have added a lot more local businesses and not just like bigger corporate like restaurant or restaurant chains. So definitely look into that. I know that's one thing that has been helping a lot of Asian American businesses stay open.
That was a really good question. Thank you for that.
Someone said, I know that many predominantly Black communities are being hit hard with COVID-19 cases. Someone else said, some people of color are being mistaken for gang members because they are wearing a bandana as a mask. And then someone else said, xenophobia could also occur within one's own racially identified community, possibly similar to internalized racism. And then someone said, I think that the dominant forces in the U.S. promote conflict and xenophobia between communities of color. Sorry, I lost it. Oh,
That's fine.
as a tool to prevent unification in the struggle against oppression. Someone else said, I read about how many low-income communities are more vulnerable as well. Someone said, I keep seeing the Wuhan market video circulating and people saying that it's what happens when they eat anything. This comes from mostly Mexican communities that I have on socials, which I wasn't expecting since some Latin American food is also weird too. Someone else said, there have been racist xenophobia in China when the government asked the people to provide comments on a possible policy on foreigners in China. Many people exhibited hatred towards people from African descent. And then someone else said, colorism is persistent in almost all communities of color.
Those are really good examples and comments. I think was there another Q&A or no?
No, it's the same question.
Okay, wasn't sure. Yeah, again, thank you a whole lot for the level of participation. Everything y'all are saying is very true and very correct. It's yeah, again, still very showing of the different problems that we already have as a people.
So before I get into the next topic, someone did ask, since there is so much misinformation from the media, is there a correct way to getting a better information? I would say stick to government websites. Stuff like the CDC should have a lot of different types of information on the spread of the virus. I know a lot of government websites have been putting out more and more data on this, so definitely look at the links that you're going to. Maybe don't necessarily look at everything that Twitter or Instagram have for you, because that again is a lot of opinion and not fact unless it's a verified account. So going into immigration and the border, so now we're going to explain how xenophobic immigration policies and perceptions in the media resulted in xenophobic attitudes within communities of color. So I know some of you have touched on this already, but so immigration and the borders. So the xenophobic terminology is used to describe undocumented immigrants and the countries that they arrive from. So I know a lot of people say that like countries are like poor, or they're like war zones, or they just use very negative terms towards certain countries. And we also see who is considered an undocumented immigrant. So if we look back to the ICE raids that were happening, the Latinx community was highly targeted during those times, and folks were all being sent back to one place, even if they weren't all from, let's say, Mexico. Everyone who presented as Latinx or Hispanic was being sent back to Mexico, even if they weren't Mexican. And it's also like, who is an undocumented immigrant? People most likely turn to the Latinx community and don't really talk about folks from Europe who are also undocumented. And it's also this assumption behind the right way of immigrating, sentiments from naturalized citizens or nativists who claim that not everyone, like everything would be fixed if you just come over the right way, but there really is no right way when there are so many policies that are put in place that stop people from being able to become naturalized citizens. So another thing is the resistance against the border. So this is a video that we're going to show of an artist who paints the border. This is also an AJ Plus video.
Sorry to cut you off.
It's okay.
La idea es como que tener la continuación del cielo, como si fuera un telón, ¿no? Que se pone enfrente. Entonces, cuando uno está, y lo hicimos precisamente aquí en este espacio, porque hay una calle que continúa, o sea, que empieza en México y continúa en Estados Unidos, pero hay esta frontera, esta barrera que impide el movimiento, ¿no? A través de esta calle. Entonces, creando como que la sensación como si uno más estuviera el cielo. ¿Por qué no ver este espacio como si fuéramos una humanidad? No somos dos culturas, digo, sí somos diferentes culturas, pero es bajo el mismo cielo, ¿no? Entonces, como que una unidad y traer o crear esa sensación de unión.
So someone did say that they have seen these paintings in person and they are absolutely beautiful. I was also going to say this. I think it's important to talk about what is on that side of the border, because when I first saw it, a lot of the quotes on there were saying things like, "We have dreams on this side too. You can't erase our dreams." And I think that's very important to note, because we see them, or the U.S. has this notion of all immigrants being bad people, when in reality they're just trying to make a better way for themselves. So,
Something is wrong with my screen.
oh.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna stop screen sharing for a second. See if I can get this fixed.
Okay. So as James tries to fix it, we'll have the question up in a second, but we do have another discussion question for you all, and it's, how has the materialization and conceptualization behind boundaries/borders perpetuate xenophobic sentiments? So how has the U.S., what have, the different notions that you see and the way that the border is promoted here in the U.S. or in any country that you may know of, how does that perpetuate different xenophobic sentiments? You can go ahead and drop those responses in the chat, and the question should be up. There it is in a second. So someone said reinforces the differences between people instead of their commonalities. Borders by nature create an us versus them mentally. I feel like the conceptualization behind the boundaries/borders has only created a bigger divide between communities. And then someone else said physical boundaries are excessive emphasis of borders perpetuate a social and mental separation of people. Someone else said a stereotype was painted about immigrants or people crossing the border. Someone else said a border is a symbol of xenophobia. And then another person said, insisting that a border is to protect our way of life. And someone else said, the border defines the other. It is a force of exclusion. And someone else said, we see borders as a way to protect ourselves, thus meaning that those on the other side aren't welcome. And then someone said, some people don't want to understand the other, or for fear of finding out how much they have in common with the other. Someone else said them versus us mentality. Someone else said, I feel like the border wall sentiment in the U.S. paints Mexicans as dangerous or a threat that necessitates a border wall when it is clearly xenophobic. And then someone else said borders emphasize separation and hostility. So these are all really great. Thank you all for sharing.
All right, we're going to go on to the next slide, which was kind of spoiled because I was trying to get this situated. So next we're talking about xenophobia and Islamophobia, and looking at how xenophobia and Islamophobic sentiments persist in communities of color, but also how it affects Muslims in particular. So before I guess the biggest thing I wanted to talk about in this was the idea of being different, but in a religious sense, because xenophobia, as we've already described, is focusing on this. It's about the fear of this other that could exist, or that does exist, and that it's completely unknown to you. And I wanted to compare it to Christianity, for example, because Christianity is very prominent in the U.S. And even in the way that the nation's forefathers created the country, religion was always kind of on the forefront in regards to, or sorry, Christianity was always in the forefront in regards to religion. And there's always this reluctance to learn about Islam in particular because of this difference, and also the fact that it's still a very prominent religion, just like Christianity. So they're always kind of pitted against each other. And because this country is so focused on Christianity, it demonizes anyone who is Muslim or the Islamic faith in general. And there's also a huge misrepresentation in the media. So this phrase that you see on your screen, Allah Akbar, actually translates to God is the most great, which is simply it's a way of religious praise, which is also very prominent in Christianity. But the way this phrase has been used in media, it's been very demonized. And because of that, it's also demonized anyone who is Muslim. And also it connects very heavily to public health, physical and mental. So there was an instance where a patient required some type of surgery, and she had told the doctor that regardless of what happens in surgery, um, she requested that her hijab be left on after the surgery, and she had made it very apparent that this is something that she truly, truly needed and required. And the doctor said, "Okay, I understand." And when she had awoken after the surgery, she found that her hijab had been taken off. And also, there was an instance of a Berkeley student who was told to wear shorts during a therapy appointment. And when she had actually showed up in long pants, it became more of an issue, or it became a bigger issue than people were already making it out to be. And so, even though both of these things may not seem all that relevant because physically or mentally harmed necessarily, or at least in any visible way people could see, being able to be comfortable in whatever health space you are in, or wherever you're trying to get health assistance or just health support, that is incredibly important, because if you don't feel comfortable trying to get help in regards to your physical or mental health, that in itself can be harmful to you, whether you're hurt or not.
So now we're going to go into xenophobia within the Latinx community. So I do want to give a quick disclaimer. A lot of the examples I'm
Giselle, your audio is
xenophobic ideologies from a young age. So there's this whole Mexican versus Salvadorian war where people believe that one is greater than the other, and they're always constantly talking about how one person is lesser than the other because they are either Mexican or Salvadorian. And this also happened a lot. There was a lot of xenophobia that was shown during the caravan of 2019 from Central America, when folks in Tijuana were very upset that the folks from the caravan even wanted to be were even settled there, and that they didn't want them there and they were treating them poorly and seeing them as less, when they should have been more united, and they should have seen that they were just asking for help, as most folks from Mexico have gone through the same thing or know people who have gone through the same thing. So it shouldn't have been a divide in the community, more of everybody should have came together in that sense. So we do have some more examples from Twitter on this. So again, someone tweeted, "Mexican white Latinx are trash. I don't even care." And then with no context to all, someone else quoted the tweet and said, "Salvadorians are trash, period. Only good thing they're at is making pupusas." So again, there was no context there of why they even brought up Salvadorians, but they did. And then someone else tweeted, "If we're being honest," and then if you can see the picture, they edited the Mexican flag on the Krusty Krab and then the Salvadorian flag on the chum bucket. And someone said, "Salvadorians are the worst. I'm Honduran and we're pretty bad, but Salvadorians are just awful. you don't have to put the Mexican flag there. You can put any country flag there. And then they said, I'm sorry, but I really dislike Salvadorians a lot. And then they ended with, I don't hate them, chill, which is very contradictory because they just, they really just said a lot of hate towards Salvadorians.
Something else I actually wanted to add, it wasn't in regards to the Latinx community, but seeing this slide now for some reason, I don't know why I didn't think of this before when we were making this, but something I had realized was that the connection between the Black community and different African communities in the US is also a really good example. It's definitely gotten better, but for a while, there was this notion in the Black community that different African populations, their experience within Africa or their lives within Africa was very poor and awful and bad. And there had always been a lot of tension there, which is, it's definitely very similar to this. So I just wanted to put that out there just as information. I'm sorry I didn't think to make a slide on it. It was completely my fault. And also, we'll be talking about xenophobia within the Asian American community. So first we want to present this idea of the model minority myth. So it's this perception or idea that Asians and Asian Americans are successful in comparison to other marginalized groups. So I wanted to juxtapose this to the colonial mindset, where we basically, it means that we live in a society where European features or attributes, this Eurocentric ideology of whiteness being superior, and the fact that it's almost like every single racial group is trying to elevate themselves to whiteness. So juxtaposing these two ideas, because the model minority myth, it completely others the Asian American community from any other community. And because of this idea of Eurocentric, Eurocentricity in general in America, juxtaposing these two ideas, we see that there can be a lot of hate thrown back at each other between the Asian American community and also other minority communities, where each is kind of bashing the other for whatever reasons, when they're both trying to, I don't want to say trying to achieve whiteness, but there's this underlying idea that whiteness is the best, and neither of them are there. So they're bashing each other because they can't bash whiteness because of the ideology whiteness is best. So xenophobia within Asian American communities, this slide best can be described as how this perceived notion of Asian American communities itself exhibit xenophobia within all different types of communities of color.
So there was a question that said, how can we have a productive conversation about xenophobia in the United States against Asian Americans, but still acknowledge the racism in China against Africans? Which brings us to our next point. How do we call in our friends and family? So I do want to bring up a type of conversation you can have, which is the what you're saying is versus the you are conversation. So telling someone or saying you are racist by saying this, they're not going to, they're most likely just going to agree with you. They'll probably argue a little bit, but it won't get anywhere because you will tell them you're being racist and they're going to say, yeah, I know I am, I don't care. So rather approaching it in the what you're saying is racist or can be seen as harmful to certain folks, this allows for more discussion because then they'll ask you how or why that happens. And also like you can also, it just gives you more leeway to have a safer conversation rather than you and this person going back and forth and having someone attack you or it coming off of them as you're attacking them. And I do want to go back to the community guidelines on this, which is challenge the idea, not the person, which also stems into this helping others unlearn harmful ideologies. Just remembering that not everyone has the same social justice background as you might. Not everyone has access to webinars like this. Not everyone is knowledgeable in the fact that they can even have reach out to resources like this. So that's something very important to keep in mind, and also understanding that a lot of people think the way that they do because that's how they were raised. So no one is born xenophobic or racist. this is just how they are, that's how they grow up. This is what is instilled in their minds at a very young age, and that's something that they probably only knew, like that's all they know their whole lives. So it's also understanding that, and again, understanding that you don't have to have these conversations with people if you are trying your best, and someone just isn't willing to learn. Take that step back and just give yourself that time and that space to just heal from that conversation. You don't have to answer everyone's questions. You can always point someone to certain articles that you have read or something that has helped you understand. But again, it's not always our jobs to try to fix everyone's ideologies or try to change anyone in any way.
So this is the resource slide that we got a lot of this information from. If you'd like to take a photo, you can, so that way you can look up the information yourself or use it to find other sources, anything like that. And also, if for some reason you're not able to get a photo right now, this will be placed on YouTube at some point, so you'll be able to come back to the video.
So there is a question that says, how can we educate family or friends who have grown up with these harmful ideologies? Any tips? Again, it's having them, like, having that conversation with them and saying, like, I know your parents have told you this, but, like, have you seen what this can do to these people? Again, just, like, letting them know what it does and the effects of their ideologies. Again, pointing them to different resources, and just having a conversation with them one-on-one can also be helpful. Sorry, James.
No, that's fine. Actually, I wanted to add on to that. I think it's really important to make sure that you're coming towards your family with information, or your friends with information, because so look, at the same way we're doing this with you all right now. Imagine if everyone in this webinar right now did not know about this information, or this was all new to everyone, and we wouldn't want to come with the information and start attacking people or attacking ideologies. That's why we try to lay everything out. Say, hey, this is the information. You do with this what you will, but this is the information you have present. These are the different arguments for that information, and so on and so forth. So that way, no one really feels attacked if they don't know anything, or they realize that they've been part of the problem in some way, shape, or form. So that way, they're able to dissect the information at their own speed, their own level, and move forward with it. Just to add on to that answer. So this is the end of our webinar. This is the survey link. Please fill it out, because we genuinely do. We do look over the surveys and see how we can improve these presentations, particularly in this case, because this is actually our first webinar program this quarter, and we're going to be doing everything online now. So please let us know how this went, whether there are any issues that you noticed. Even if you don't necessarily have solutions for it, if you just show us the issues, we'll try to fix to the best of our abilities. And also, this will give you an opportunity to win, or to enter an opportunity drawing. So yeah, thank you again to everyone who participated. Also, now we'll be moving to the Slack app to continue the discussion, or if you have any questions right now, we're more than happy to answer them.